This video is sponsored by Audible, a service offering the largest audiobook library. Audible is convenient to me when I'm out for a run or driving and need to catch up on an audiobook I'm listening to. I really like that Audible offers a free credit to get any audiobook free every month to expand your library. And these audiobooks aren't going anywhere. Even if you cancel your subscription, you still get access to your library. Right now, I'm listening to The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft, and I'm liking it much more than I thought, so you should check it out. Start listening with a 30-day Audible trial, get one audiobook, and full access to the Plus catalog absolutely free. Visit audible.com/ScareTheater or text ScareTheater to 500-500. In 1989, in Vancouver, British Columbia, a middle-aged nurse named Cindy James was found in a condition that seemed straight out of a horror film. A jogger discovered her in the yard of an abandoned house, on the ground with her hands and feet tied behind her back. She appeared to have been drugged and strangled to death. As gruesome of a scene as this was, oddly enough, the police concluded the death was a suicide. Cindy James seemed to live a normal life. She was a nursing school graduate and went on to become the administrator of a preschool for kids with behavioral disorders. Everything looked like it was going well until something changed in 1982. Cindy filed for a divorce from her husband, Roy Makepeace, and 4 months later, she experienced a strange sequence of events that would last for 7 years, ultimately leading to her demise. In October of 1982, she called the police to report that she was receiving obscene and threatening phone calls. Throughout the next several months, she made many reports saying someone was prowling around her house, having her porch light smashed, and her phone line severed. She even started receiving threatening notes on her doorstep. This was only the beginning. Eventually, the attacker started to physically assault Cindy. Over 100 incidents were reported in the 7 years leading up to Cindy's death, but whenever the police arrived at her home, no one except for her was there, and they couldn't find any evidence of an intruder. Over time, the police slowly grew skeptical of her claims. In one of these incidents, on January 27, 1983, there was a night where a friend of Cindy came over to visit. Upon knocking on the door, there was no answer. Her friend walked around the house to investigate, and she found Cindy outside on the ground with a nylon stocking tied around her neck. Cindy claimed she went out to the garage to grab a box, and someone grabbed her from behind. The only thing she saw were white sneakers. After this incident, she moved to a new house, painted her car, and changed her last name. But all of that was useless. The stalker continued to harass her. It was at this point that she hired a private investigator named Ozzy Caban to look into this. On January 30th, 1984, Ozzy Caban heard weird sounds coming from a two-way radio that he gave to Cindy, and he immediately rushed to her house. The door was locked, but when he looked through a window, he saw Cindy lying on the floor with a knife through her hand with another threatening note. She was not able to remember much about this incident, except for what she told the police in this interview.
But it was trying to push his knife over me or something. I don't think I really remember anything else.
On a particularly bad occasion, Cindy was found nearly unconscious lying in a ditch about 6 miles from her home. She was covered in cuts and bruises, had a black nylon stocking tied around her neck, and was suffering from hypothermia. Once again, she claims to have no memory of what happened. This was far from the end of it. In April of 1986, Cindy's friend and her friend's husband stayed at Cindy's house for the night to make sure she was okay. They woke in the middle of the night to the basement in flames and the phones dead. The friend's husband went outside and saw a man at the curb whom he asked to call the fire department. Instead, the man just ran away. Eventually, Cindy was committed to a psychiatric ward because a doctor feared that she was becoming suicidal. The psychiatrist at the ward said she exhibited no signs of mental illness and that most of her distress came from people not believing her. 10 weeks later, she left the hospital. Soon after leaving, she told her friends and family that she knew more than what she was telling everyone, and the reason she had to be so secretive was because she was afraid the attacker would hurt her family. Cindy went to the police and told the officers that her stalker was her ex-husband, Roy Makepeace. The police questioned Roy for hours, and he denied having anything to do with it. The investigation into him was unable to find any evidence pointing toward him committing the crime. He was also able to play them a recording he received on his voicemail from whoever was stalking Cindy. The voice sounds like the voice of a woman disguising her voice, which further reinforced the police believing that Cindy was the one doing all this. Roy Makepeace, who was a psychiatrist, said he believed Cindy was suffering from split personality. On May 25th, 1989, Cindy went missing. On the day of her disappearance, her car was found in a neighborhood parking lot with blood on the door. 2 weeks after her disappearance, she was found in an abandoned house in that horrific condition I described earlier. Hands and feet bound behind her back and a black nylon stocking tied around her neck. The autopsy revealed she did not actually die from suffocation, but rather from an overdose of morphine and other drugs. Whereas the police concluded the death was a suicide, the coroner ruled the death an unknown event. Everyone agrees that this case is tragic, but what many disagree on is whether it was a suicide or a murder. When I first looked into this, I was very confident this was a suicide. The phone call that Roy Makepeace played for the police sounds like a woman's voice being disguised, which could have easily been Cindy. The police were estimated to have used over $1 million of resources investigating Cindy's case, yet they never found any evidence. They did a polygraph test on her, and the results indicated she was withholding information. The night of the fire in her house, the police detected no signs of intrusion into the home, and the police would even do 24-hour surveillance on Cindy's home for days, and in that time, nothing ever happened. But the moment surveillance was taken off, the incidents would start happening again. Now, of course, it's also possible the attacker was just aware of the surveillance and didn't do anything while the police were around. And as for how she was able to create the death scene, well, the drug she overdosed on could have been taken in pill form and would take roughly 15 to 30 minutes to kick in. And the police had a knot specialist recreate tying themselves up in the same way Cindy was found, and they were able to replicate the results in 3 minutes. So it's very possible this is what happened. But upon closer inspection, there are some things here that just don't add up. Cindy didn't seem to have any psychological issues her whole life before the divorce happened. Things only got weird 4 months after she filed for divorce. Roy Makepeace could definitely be a possible suspect, especially since he claimed she had multiple personality disorder, even though the psychiatric ward she stayed in for 2.5 months said nothing like that was going on. And in some police interviews, Cindy did tell the police that Roy was physically abusive when they were married. There were also some events in which the police seemed to not be doing their due diligence. When Cindy was found in her house with a knife through her hand, the police didn't even try to take any fingerprints. At 2 scenes of attack, there was a brand of cigarette butts that didn't belong to Cindy, and at one scene, 2 gray pubic hairs were found that did not belong to Cindy. The police never followed up on any of this. We also can't just ignore the event in which the house was on fire, and the man outside just ran away after they told him to call the fire department. But I think the most damning evidence that Cindy was killed are the circumstances in which the body was found. When Cindy's body was found, it was decomposing, and the autopsy report indicates that she died the day that she went missing. So, her body would have been laying there for 2 weeks. At the abandoned house she was found at, there was a squatter who lived in a van only 5 meters away from the body, and he never noticed it. And the jogger that found the body said that he jogged that particular route twice before in the past 2 weeks, and he never noticed the body either. Even stranger is that this abandoned house was often used as a hangout spot for teenagers. Apparently, some teenagers said they had 2 small parties at that spot the same week the body was found, and none of them ever noticed it. This would indicate that maybe the body wasn't at that location for 2 weeks, but rather someone dumped the body there on the day that it was found. Now, if she was murdered, then we just need to know who did it. The obvious suspect is Roy Makepeace, since Cindy accused him, and the motive would be clear, but there are still things that don't really make much sense about this. First of all, Cindy made some pretty crazy claims about Roy, including telling the police that on a yacht trip in 1981, Roy murdered and dismembered a young couple. Yet, Cindy's sister, who was also on that trip, says this didn't happen, and there was never any evidence found of that crime. Then there's the phone call that sounded like a woman's voice that I mentioned before, which also wouldn't make sense if Roy was responsible. But Roy's biggest alibi was the house fire. When Cindy's house caught fire, and they found that mysterious man outside that ran away, Cindy told the police that Roy is responsible for the fire. This is 100% not true because Roy was in South Africa at that time. The only way Roy could have done this is if he had an accomplice, which is possible since Cindy reported at times that she was attacked by 2 or 3 people at the same time. If this is the case, one of his accomplices may have been a woman, which could explain the weird voice message. I feel like if we go strictly by Occam's razor, then the most reasonable conclusion is that Cindy did this to herself. But I still find it so hard to believe that Cindy's body really stayed in that one area for 2 weeks before being found. Things just don't add up no matter which way you look at it. This is one of the most baffling cases I've ever read about, and we'll probably never have a solid answer as to what happened. Whether Cindy was suffering from a mental illness that caused her to do this to herself, or she was murdered, I feel horrible about the pain she had to experience. What do you guys think happened? Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the flip side. And don't forget to go to audible.com/ScareTheater or text ScareTheater to 500 to get any audiobook free and full access to the Plus catalog and support the channel.